So let's just kind of quickly go through the typical costs and times for for instance we've done power tools together, we've done cordless drills, we've done cordless product, and once a design has been established, we've got a working prototype, and now it's kind of over to you, Lou. Let's make this happen. Taking, for instance, a cordless product, which we've got a motor, PCB, switch, it could be a sander or a drill or whatever. Can you give us just a quick kind of breakdown of what the timescales would be from when you've got your design and you're going to have the factory make a prototype, and then there'll be the tooling, and then there'll be the manufacturing, and then there'll be QC and all those stages.
So the front end part is the front end part is where the time takes, because that's where all the testing and all the component selection and the sourcing side is done. So once I've got a delivered brief from you, Mike, about what it is we're going to make and the 3D that we've got, the next thing really is, during that process we would have been thinking about the components that we would want to select.
Yeah. We've asked the factory what battery, what motor.
Yeah, and we kind of got a rough idea as to the sort of the levels that these things need to survive, and what FFU tests, fit for use tests, these things are going to have to go through. So we'll have a rough build. From the point of 3D, it takes about a week and a half for the factory to review that 3D and give any feedback. And the reason it takes that long is because they have to port that to their system, and then they have to work out the tooling that they need to make. And then there's always adjustments to the way that you think things should go together versus the way the factory need it to go together in order to maintain the run. And this is the other key part around sometimes where the 3D doesn't always match the 3D you give us. There's always tweaks to it when it comes back from factory, because they have to put it into an assembly line. So they have to make this, and you're getting them to make that. You're giving things to workers that are on quite a low cost. So you're giving quite a technical thing to the lowest paid workers in China, and so it's got to be simple for them to understand, and they've got to be able to put it together really quick. So the factory takes about a week to make sure that their team of people can put this thing together and physically make it. Then it goes back to yourself, and that probably takes about another week. So we've probably about 2 weeks to confirm this 3D in terms of our scale. Then once we've got that, the factory will make a prototype, and we can usually get that done within about 3 weeks, depending on kind of what it is. But usually within 3 weeks, we could have a prototype pulled together that we could do some rough testing with to sort of see, in broad terms, does this design sort of work? Does all these components fit together? Are they all happy campers together? What tweaks need to be made?
And at that point, we get a cost for the actual.
Well, at that point, we'll get a rough cost. At that point, we'll get a rough cost for the machine, and we might get a rough cost for tooling. Tooling tends to take a little bit longer because depending on how quick and where they make it. But if you said 4 weeks from 3D sign off for a mock-up costing and a tooling quote, that would be about reasonable. Mm-hmm. But it's never just one mock-up, because once we get the mock-up back, we'll test it and we'll go, actually that didn't work quite well, that didn't do what it's supposed to do, the client's not really happy with this, and then we'll go through another round. So I would say it's probably around 3 months of backwards and forwards, mock-ups, tweaks, honing the specification, because this is the part where you really do need to spend the time on it, because if you don't get this part right, you're going to have all these sorts of problems further down the road.
And if it's a new product, it may be longer, and if it's a Me Too product, it may be shorter.
Yeah, so Me Too is much easier. If the factory's already got a donor, it's much easier. They're already aware of the construction, they're already aware of the problems they're going to face with assembly, they're already aware of the problems that are in the QC line, so that makes life a lot easier. But when we're doing new stuff, which is most of what we do, it is fraught with problems, because what certifications are we going to need? What safety standards are we going to need to take into consideration? We probably need to bring somebody from TV or Intertech into that design process early on to make sure that we're not designing stuff that we're going to have to change when we get into tooling. So there'll be a much more collaborative approach, and depending on kind of what it is and whether it's really new or whether it's really new but we've got kind of a rough, like it could be a corded product that we're going to make cordless, for example. So it's new for cordless, but it might not necessarily be new for the market. So those are slightly easier to do. But if it's completely ground up design that doesn't exist ever, then again there's a whole raft of problems that are generally unseen, and we have to work through those issues. So if you just took a typical position, 3 months is a fair, reasonable position to take. And that stage, if you want someone like me to do that stage and bounce and forwards in China and do all that it's about 25k to do 25 to 30,000 to do that bit, because what you're going to get at the end of it is something that works, something that the factory can make, and a full BOM that can be delivered and it's tested. So at that point, you could take that to manufacture, and if you followed that brief, you'd end up with something that you wanted. So I work in stages. Some companies just want that bit, because that's the hard bit in terms of the design side. Getting that specification exactly right, getting the component list sorted, getting that factory on board to make it. And that's the other thing too. You got to convince a factory that it's worthwhile doing. You've got a new customer and a new product, and he's thinking it's not going to sell. I'm going to spend thousands of man hours developing and giving factory time, and it's not going to go anywhere. So you really do need to make sure the factory's on board. If the factory's not with you, it just won't happen. The factory has to be in the boat with you to make it work, or you're going to end up fighting them all the way, and it's just going to be a complete disaster.
And to be fair, I don't know how many projects we've done in the last 3-4 years, but we've probably done at least 10 projects. The factories have been really keen to move the ball forward and do it quickly and solve problems.
Because that's the thing, because if they're not with you, then suddenly there'll be problems. They'll just make stuff up. They'll be like, oh, we're on holiday, or suddenly it'll be like, oh, 6 weeks to come, because they'll be doing other things. They won't be with you. Whereas with the factories that are keen, a couple of weeks is there. 3 or 4 days you've got a response. They're really,
and we are getting quicker at turning these projects around, because the factories are trusting what we do more.
Yes, yeah. So the more we go, and it's like anything, the more they see me there, the more they work with us. It builds that collective trust, so they can see that there is business there, and there is a bit. They feel more comfortable, and that's the key part with China. If they feel like you're helping them, and they feel like we're part of their team, then things move very, very well. When we're on the other side of that, it becomes very, very, very difficult.
So if we were talking about, again, a cordless drill, give us an idea of the tooling cost and a ballpark if the client is selling 20,000 euros.
So if it's a reskin and it's just you're just taking a donor and just sticking a nice new clamshell on it, it's around 30k, give or take. But if you want to do a lot more than that, rubber over molds, and if you want a dedicated switch, if you want to redo if you want everything. So if you just do the body of a drill and you keep the factory's battery, for example, that's sort of 20-30k. If you then want to retool the battery, and you want to retool the charger, and you want a special chuck and a special switch, and you're really
fiddle with the gear.
Yeah, you want a bespoke, PCB and all this kind of stuff. Then it's sort of you're looking at sort of upwards of about 100k to get everything done.
And what sort of timescale do we want to have approved the sample, either the SLA, SLS, or machined sample? How long to go from that to first off the tools?
It's 50 days for tooling, 45 to 50 days to tool all the plastic parts up. That's the longest part of the process, is the plastic part tooling, because that takes a long time.
And then we get first offs, and usually there's some tool mods and tweaks.
Yeah, so what you do is after sort of 50 days, you probably they'll run a batch of maybe 50 to 100 molds, so that they'll cast 50 to 100 parts, and then obviously, because first shot tooling, some of it will be rough. There'll be too much flashing on the edges. It won't come out the molds like it's supposed to. Then there'll be a tooling review. Okay, what needs to be modified? These edges are no good. This plastic's not cast properly. I've got a problem where we were doing an injection part, and the machine was putting too much pressure into the injection part, and it had warped it into tooling on the top of one of our tanks that we're developing. So it didn't seal properly because there was too much pressure from the injection mold. So we just moved the injection point to the corner, and that solved the problem. So things like this that you wouldn't necessarily know about, but that you have to do all these modifications to make sure that everything sits where it's supposed to sit. After first shot tooling, it takes about 4 weeks to do the modifications, and to what we would do is tooling sign off, if you like, to say that the tooling that you paid for, what the tooling has now produced, is now perfectly aligned with what you've got.
Right.
And then effectively at that point we would do pilot production. So we then do a pilot production then of maybe 50 to 100 pieces, which is using a new tooling plus the component build, and then those would be our first fully assembled machines that we would then use to test to see if we were happy with everything. And generally speaking, those would then go into certification. So those, from pilot production, those first machines we would then use to go into the certification process.
So how long from sign off on the production tooling to doing the certification to a point where now we've got it certified and it's time to do production runs and put things into boxes?
So we would normally do whilst we're going through certification, we'd be going through FFU testing. So we do FFU testing, fit for use testing, and certification at the time. It takes about 35 to 40 days to go through certification on the build, and then we'd be doing our FFU testing whilst that's going through certification. And that's just around making sure that the motors and the gearboxes are all doing what they're supposed to be doing, if it's a tool, or if the fit, form and function doing what it's supposed to be doing. If it's a baby gate, we'll be doing the open and shut test. We're making sure all the metal's produced like it's supposed to. All those things gets done whilst certification is going through, so we don't lose any time in the process. So we're trying to condense the delivery time, because what we want is speed to market as well. What we don't want to do is spend time in what I would call perpetual engineering. We need to make sure that, because when you look at a product, it's always, can we just do this? Can we just do that? Well, actually what you need to do is, if the product delivers the brief, get it into the market, make sure it delivers, make sure it tests properly, make sure it can do what you thought it can do. And if you've done some beta testing and your customers are all happy, you need to start getting a return on your investment. Because if you spend 100 grand on tooling, if you've got a design done, it's probably another 100 plus K. If you use me to make it, the whole process costs about 70K. All this time you're burning money, and then all the while your product's still sat, you're not doing anything. So that there needs to be a commercial edge as well to make sure that this doesn't just keep running on and it's just a black hole. There needs to be an end point where it gets into the market and there's a return then for the company. And what my company does is make sure that timeline is maintained whilst managing the integrity of the product. Obviously, if the product fails or the product's got it won't obviously go to market. We'll fix that problem, but the idea being is that we keep on top of the factory and the process so that things are moving as efficiently as they possibly can do, so that we are getting that project to market.
But the factory does take responsibility, doesn't it? Once we've got an approved design, they can say, right, okay, we're now going to back this.
Yes.
And if there's any problems with it,
yes.
we will fix those problems, because they've now taken on responsibility for the design.
So like when one of the parts we did where they tweaked the design because we couldn't, the way that we wanted to do it, we couldn't actually get it into mass production. And so the factory then guaranteed its solution to the client and indemnified all the losses.
Yeah.
So if the factory believe in something and the factory are willing to, and that's quite, and I've only had that happen once before in the last sort of 5 years. So for the factory to do that, they really do have a lot of faith in the product. They don't like losing money. So if they're going to guarantee something, you can.
So now we've got the testing done and the approvals done, and now we're going to start manufacturing.
Yes.
So from a manufacturing run, typically, what, 2,000 units?
It depends what the MOQs are. So the MOQs will be part of the commercial phase. So
MOQs, minimum order quantities.
So when we talk about commercials, so when we pitch the project to the factory, at that point we'll be talking about what's the minimum order we can place. Obviously, we'll be talking to the client about what he thinks his forecast is going to be. Hopefully, it's more than 500 units. It ought to be if he's investing, or 1,000 units. If he's investing 100 grand into tuning, we're expecting that to be a lot more than just a small set of orders. So we'll get at the point we're pitching to the factory, we'll have the rough forecast from the client. Obviously, we'll try and keep the MOQs as low as we can for clients. We don't want high MOQs because we don't want it. That's a barrier to market. If the MOQ is 5,000 and then 3,000 are just sat with the client for this, it doesn't bode well for either of us.
Especially if it's a new product, he doesn't know necessarily he's going to be able to shift.
Yeah, exactly. So what we want is a balance. We want the factory to be happy with the MOQ, and we want the customer to be happy that it's a fair position. And
choosing the factory, the more confident, bigger class, what do you call them, class A, triple A?
Yeah. So I would say the factories that deal with places like Bosch and DeWalt and Black & Decker. These are the top tier, if you like, of
and
Chinese
they're used
factories.
to like 100,000.
Yeah, they're used to the massive. They're used to the massive volume. So when we come along and we've got a brand new project and we can't necessarily guarantee volume, when we know there's going to be a lot of pain, they're not best suited to our needs. And they might have a lot of boxes to be ticked on, QC and engineering and running of the factory. But if we can't get our project into those factories and we've got massive high MOQs and massive on costs, then the project dies right then and there. So we tend to pick factories where they're not as wealthy, I would say, or they don't do massive volumes. We would class them as a tier 2 or a tier 3 factory. But what they've got is they're really hungry and they're really passionate about what they do. And what you get is when you place an order, you're like first in the queue. You're not like waiting 50 days for it to go on the run. Because what you don't want to do is put an order in and then wait 3 months for it to be made. It's because it takes 3 months for it to be made. So you don't want to have to wait for your order to be scheduled and go, right, we give an order to a factory now. We can't even start that for 6 months' time because we've got all this other stuff to do. So what you want to do is when you put an order in, you want it scheduled for production within like 10 or 15 days. You want them to place the order onto the components guys. You want it. So it's more of a difficult road, but you get a better service and you get better support, which is the key part.
No, I agree. So we've done. We're now making it,
yes,
and we've decided the minimum order quantity is 2,000 units,
yes,
which is probably in terms of power tools is kind of a container-ish.
Yeah, so usually a 20-foot. It depends on what it is, to be honest. If it's a drill, you probably get a lot more in the product than that. Most factories build drills of around 500 to 1,000 units is a sort of typical small power tool order, but that's usually on their own product because they're already making them. So when we talk about rebadging or what we class as bar slapping, the MOQs are typically much more standardised because it's what the factory's already making. They're just changing the colour, but the switch is all the same. All the core components. When you're making something very new, that's a special run. You've got different. They might make your product twice a year, whereas they might make the other thing all the time. So there might be only so many workers that can make your thing because they only made it a few times. So when you're making brand new things, the MOQs can be a bit higher, like you were saying, sort of 1,500. It might even be a container. It just depends on the whole.
So just give us an idea of how long the build takes, what time and who is the QC in
yeah, sure,
QC process, and then time on the water.
So if you just take a standard PO, so it usually takes about 25 to 25 days to order the components. So say we're the first of the month and you put the order on the factory. By the 25th of that month, all the raw materials should be ordered and in the factory waiting for 25 to 30 days, depending on kind of what it is, but they should all be in the factory ready to check. Now, depending on kind of what QC you've gone for and where your feeling is, I would always advise you to do a component check to make sure that the components that they've ordered match the components that you've asked for on the specification. And sometimes the components will also be listed in a certification as well. So you want to make sure that what they're ordering is in line. And it's just a sense check, just to make sure that there's no errors, there's no problems, because they can occur. But honest mistakes or by deliberate, you just want to make sure that the bits they've ordered are the bits that you want, and they're matching the bits that are on our specification sheet. Then it gets scheduled for production, and production takes about 20 days. So if you said 45 to 50 days from the point of order to the point of production finish, that's a pretty standard build time for a power tool.
And then it's going to the dock?
No, so then it would be QC'd. So once it's built, you're going to want a QC. Now sometimes people won't want to do a QC, and I would highly advise against that. You definitely want a QC, and that can take a couple of weeks. Now
what's the definition of a QC? Does he actually open up every box? Does he look
It just depends on it just depends on where you want to be. It depends on your level of QC. So if you take one of the jobs we just recently did, it's a brand new product, we're going to QC every single core component to start with, because there's some critical parts that we're not, usually take a sample size, maybe 20 or 30%, but we're going to check everything because some of these parts are so critical that even one failure will cause the machine to fail. So on the component check, it's 100%. And what we'll also do is pull out some of those components and redo some of the FFU tests, fit for use tests that we did in the previous mock-up phase and in the previous testing phase, just to make sure there's consistency. This is the other key part. Then when it's made, I think we're going to do on this particular we're going to do about 30 or 40% QC, just under half, and we're just going to pick a random selection to test. And then generally what we'll do is we'll strip it down. We'll do the function test to make sure it operates. We'll put whatever one on a live test just to make sure we're getting the right cycle counts and all the rest of it. So, but typically it's 10 or 20% in a typical QC. And if you're looking at
and the QC happens in the factory?
Yes, in the factory.
Somewhere else?
No, actually at the factory. A lot of the factories, all the factories that we deal with have all the testing equipment on site, which is also important because you don't want it leaving site and going back to waste too much time. I say 2 weeks for QC because if there's anything wrong, you want it reworked. So the 2 weeks covers rework time. If there's anything wrong, it can be reworked and solved. Once it leaves, as I said before, once it leaves that factory, you're pretty much on your own. I mean, you've got recourse to the factory, and you can moan, and you can say, I want a refund, but the damage is done. The product's not, if it fails, it fails. So really, you want to solve all your problems, and you want to do everything you can so there are no problems, which is what QC is all about. So if you look at the holy grail of dealing with China, there's 3 documents. One is the specification sheet. It is absolutely the daddy when it comes to making sure that what you want is absolutely critical. Then you've got the component check to make sure that what's on your specification is what they've actually bought, and to make sure that everything is in line with you. And then there's the pre-shipment report, which means that what they've made, or checks what they've made at the end, is what you expected them to make on your purchase order. So the pre-shipment is the final check to make sure that what you're going to get is what you ordered, and it's sort of like the final tick in the box, because in pre-shipment you will also double check all the components again to make sure none of them have been switched out on the run, or to make sure that none of them have gone astray. Because it could be that if you just take simple things like washers and screws, you might not specify them, but if you don't specify them, then they'll be using whatever they want, and that might be okay. But you want to make sure they don't have free will to switch out bits and pieces, because things that they would consider perhaps not important could be really critical to the build.
Stainless steel.
Or
not a stainless steel.
Yeah, exactly right. So and again, China's not trying to be difficult, and again, China's not trying to be. That's just its nature.
It's a culture.
It's a culture. That's just what they do. So it's a bit like having a go at a dog for peeing in the house. That's part of it. He's just a dog. China's a bit like that. China is not. It's not trying to be difficult, and it's not looking at trying to shaft its customer. It's just trying to save money. And if you haven't specified it, and if you don't police it as well, and they know they can get away with it, then they absolutely will. It's a bit like they. It's not that they haven't got a moral code, but if their view is if you're not bothered about checking it, and you don't care about making sure that it's right, and then there's an opportunity, then they will absolutely take it.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the kind of conclusion to all this is it's the same as design. It's exactly the same as design. You can do it yourself, and you will get there eventually.
Yeah.
And it'll take you a long time, and you'll make lots of mistakes, and you'll learn lots of things. Or you can have somebody who does it all the time, and it will cost you probably less money, take you a lot less time, and you'll be ready to do the next one. And I think the same thing's true of the sourcing. You can go and kiss an awful lot of frogs in China, and you can be burnt, or you might be lucky and get a really good guy, really good relationship, and it'll be fine for years. And I know people who've done that. They've found an amazing factory, and they've built their entire business on one factory. But I've also know of people that haven't had good experiences. Yeah. And when you have a bad experience, and you're talking about 10,000 products out there in the market, and all of a sudden the plug's made of the wrong plastic.
Yeah, well, the fuses, for instance, sometimes they don't fill them with the right amount of sand. right? And you're never going to know that unless you weigh the bloody things, right?
Yeah.
So 2.1 grams is what you should have in a fuse. If it's not 2.1, anything below 2 grams is going to be a fake fuse. And you would think, why are they doing that? But they do. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah. So, moral of the story is, my experience is that using your company, and probably as importantly your network, makes my job a lot easier and my clients' businesses a lot better than them trying to do it themselves. I mean, again, we work with big brands who have their own people in China, their own factories in China, but I think in the development area that we're in, where we're doing new products, I think finding your team of companies, your team of friends, clients, is a real boon for people who want to develop new products quickly.
Well, and what we do is we remove that fear of China, because China's amazing. If you manage China well, China can be phenomenal. It'll be the best partner you've ever had in your life of building stuff and delivering stuff. Nobody in the world does it better than they do. What people fail on is not knowing what they want. I think that's the critical point. And what we do is tease out what it is you actually do want. Because people go, I want this, but actually that's not what you want. What you want is, if we were going to do something simple like a cup, for example, people go, I want this cup, but actually, what you want is you want a cup that's 60 or 70 millimeters wide with a handle that is shaped, X, Y, and you've got to put your finger in it. It's got to feel comfortable, and it's got to have a lip on it so that when you drink out of it, it's not dripping all down your neck, or your top. So it's about getting people to think about what they want in a slightly different way, and that part of the process really is the make or break parts of projects, because it's the concept. Everything's formed at that point, and if that bit of it's not right, then further on you go down the process, it's like it compounds our problem, and then it snowballs, and then you get this wobble effect, and then you don't know with a cup, you end up with a tall glass with no handle because the specs have gone off on a turn. So it's really understanding the brief and honing that specification to a point where almost overkill. Really, you can't have enough information on that specification sheet, and then we've got a really good shot of getting what you want at the back end. If that's too ambiguous or too vague, and that's part of the design process we go through, because we start off with, we need a motor to do this, and as we go through the process, we tweak it. It needs to have this gearing. It needs to have, we need to change the gearing to sinter gear. It's not plastic. It needs to have a planet gearbox, not a standard gearbox. And we tweak all this process. It's not a gearbox anymore. Now it's this 15-point thing at the end that it needs to be. And then this is the torque, and this is all the things that it needs to deliver. So the spec's not just a gearbox now. It needs to deliver 50 newton meters, or it needs this pull force, and that's where we need to get to with.
I think that the really exciting part of that I've found working together is that if I tried to find, like we were doing it, we only wanted some fabric.
Yes.
And because the fabric is made in China, and normally the fabric manufacturers are all in the same place, you can, through a few phone calls, find out where these factories are, and you can physically go to these factories and you can have 100 samples of this fabric.
Yes.
Now, I could not find that fabric that easily. I mean, but the way the networks work is that they seem to be able to find the unfindable. Granted, they couldn't find a level, but they
will do when it's specified.
They didn't find many levels. But yeah, and the same with plastics.
That's a challenge at Alibaba, because what you'll find on Alibaba is you won't necessarily find factories. You'll just find agents that say they can find stuff for you, and then you end up in this secondary world, if you like. It's
like talking through Chinese whispers, but third or fourth hand information is going backwards and forwards.
So that's a good point. The other thing I do as well is I don't just go to the factory, I also go to all the component factories as well, because it's really important that you understand, if you're doing something on behalf of a client, where the stuff is actually coming from, because that will also be specified as well. So if we find this, we'll go back to this level, when I go back and we find the right level, we'll specify that factory for the level, because we don't want to keep redoing the sourcing.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that they're buying from that factory.
So the specification isn't just a level with those numbers.
But it's also then from this factory specify the component factory as well, because then they can't then change this. They can't then suddenly, because the other thing that factory do is they go, well, that's a specification. I can buy that specification from 10 factories. Well, actually, no, you can't, because I've only tested it from this one factory. So I'd have to go and test it from all these 10 to make sure that we're on the same page. So once we found that component, we then specify that factory in that building material, so that and that's the other reason for doing the component checks, to make sure they're buying it from the places that you'd originally specified it from. So that, again, it's just about removing that wiggle room from China. I won't say no, there's no wiggle room, then we're all happy campers. Mm-hmm. They're like children to start with. They're trying to test you. They're trying to push the envelope. They're trying to see what they can get away with. It's not because that's just their culture. They're just trying to see, what does he really know? Does he really know where he's buying this from? Does he really know what he's talking about? Or can we shave a few cents off here and can we shave a few cents off there? At the end,
they're working on relatively small margins.
Yes, they are. That's the thing.
That's the bottom line, isn't it?
It's the volume that they want. That's what keeps the factories going, and they're all driven to keep the price as low as possible. So the factories I deal with all the time, and we've been friends for a very long time. There's no different. They're all doing it exactly the same. I trust them with my life, but when it comes to building product, the process has to be followed, because there can be no wiggle room.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's good. Thanks very much.
No, very good. So we're going to do some more of these little podcasts about China. And it'd be good if you've got any questions, you can send us the questions, and we can perhaps do another one. We do a sort of a questions and answer session. But if you do like these kinds of little podcasts, give us a like, throw us a comment, and we can do a few more.